The relationship between Russia and the United States is complex, marked by periods of cooperation and intense rivalry. This distrust isn't new, it's rooted in historical grievances and ideological clashes that have shaped the perceptions of both nations. To understand why some Russians harbor negative views of the USA, we must delve into this intricate history. From the outset, the two countries have been on different paths. The US, founded on principles of individual liberty and democracy, often clashed with Russia's historical emphasis on strong, centralized power. This fundamental difference in values laid the groundwork for future conflicts. The Cold War solidified the existing divide between the two nations. The rivalry, fueled by ideological differences and the threat of nuclear annihilation, cast a long shadow over global politics for decades. This period witnessed proxy wars, espionage, and a constant battle for geopolitical influence. For many Russians, the Cold War wasn't just an abstract ideological struggle, it was a lived reality. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, often perceived as a victory for the West, brought immense economic hardship and political instability to Russia. The post-Cold War era offered a glimmer of hope for improved relations, but that hope soon faded. The expansion of NATO, the Western military alliance, eastward towards Russia's borders, was seen as a betrayal by many Russians. Despite assurances from Western leaders, this expansion was interpreted as a sign that the West was encroaching on Russia's sphere of influence. This perceived betrayal fueled resentment and reinforced the belief that the West, particularly the US, was not a reliable partner. This feeling of being encircled and threatened by NATO has become a cornerstone of Russian foreign policy thinking. The rise of Vladimir Putin to power in Russia marked a significant turning point in US-Russia relations. His ascent to the presidency in 1999 came at a time when Russia was grappling with economic instability and a loss of global influence following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Putin, a former KGB agent, brought with him a deep suspicion of the West and a desire to restore Russia's status as a great power. His background in intelligence shaped his worldview, fostering a belief that the West, particularly the United States, was intent on undermining Russia's sovereignty and influence. Under his leadership, the Russian government began to actively promote anti-Western narratives, often portraying the US as a hostile, imperialist force seeking to weaken Russia. State-controlled media played a crucial role in disseminating these messages, painting a picture of a Russia under siege by Western powers. This anti-Western rhetoric resonated deeply with a segment of the Russian population who felt humiliated by the Soviet Union's collapse and distrustful of the West's intentions. Many Russians viewed the 1990s as a period of national humiliation, marked by economic hardship and a loss of international prestige. The West's support for economic reforms and NATO's eastward expansion were seen as direct threats to Russian interests. Putin's government skillfully exploited these sentiments, using them to consolidate power and justify its increasingly authoritarian policies. By positioning himself as a defender of Russian sovereignty and a restorer of national pride, Putin was able to garner widespread support. His administration's actions, from the annexation of Crimea to military interventions in Syria, were framed as necessary measures to protect Russia from Western aggression and to reassert its role on the global stage. The narrative of a resurgent Russia standing up to Western hegemony became a central theme of Putin's presidency. This not only bolstered his domestic popularity, but also served to distract from internal issues such as corruption and economic stagnation. By fostering a sense of external threat, Putin's regime was able to maintain a tight grip on power, suppress dissent, and limit political freedoms. As a result, the rise of Putin and the accompanying anti-Western sentiment have had profound implications for international relations. The adversarial stance towards the West has led to increased tensions, economic sanctions, and a new era of geopolitical rivalry. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for comprehending the current state of global affairs and the challenges that lie ahead. Section 5. Media Manipulation, Fanning the Flames of Distrust. The role of media, particularly state-controlled media in Russia, cannot be understated in shaping public opinion. Through a carefully orchestrated campaign, these media outlets have become powerful tools in the hands of the government, influencing the thoughts and beliefs of millions. Under Putin, Russian television, radio, and newspapers have become mouthpieces for the government, disseminating propaganda and disinformation aimed at discrediting the West and promoting a siege mentality. This strategy is not new, but it has been refined and intensified in recent years, with a focus on creating a narrative that positions Russia as a besieged fortress, constantly under threat from external enemies. These media outlets routinely portray the United States as a decadent and morally corrupt society, obsessed with undermining traditional Russian values. By highlighting social issues, protests, and instances of moral decay in the West, Russian media seeks to create a stark contrast between the perceived chaos of Western societies and the supposed stability and moral superiority of Russia. They accuse the United States of orchestrating revolutions in neighboring countries to weaken Russia's influence and paint a picture of a world where Russia is constantly under threat from Western aggression. This narrative is reinforced through dramatic visuals and sensationalist reporting, designed to evoke fear and distrust among the Russian populace. The portrayal of the West as an ever-present danger serves to justify the government's actions and policies, both domestically and internationally. The impact of this media manipulation is profound. It shapes the worldview of ordinary Russians, fostering a sense of nationalism and suspicion towards the West. This, in turn, strengthens the government's grip on power, as a populace that feels threatened is more likely to support authoritarian measures and aggressive foreign policies. The influence of state-controlled media extends beyond news broadcasts. It permeates educational materials, cultural programs, and even entertainment, ensuring that the government's narrative is reinforced across all aspects of daily life. From a young age, Russians are exposed to a version of history and current events that aligns with the government's agenda, making it difficult for alternative viewpoints to gain traction. In the digital age, the reach of this propaganda has only expanded. Social media platforms and online news sites are flooded with state-sponsored content, making it challenging for individuals to discern fact from fiction. The lines between news and propaganda blur, creating an environment where distrust and misinformation thrive. Ultimately, the goal of this media manipulation is to create a society that is united in its distrust of the West and unwavering in its support for the government. By fanning the flames of distrust, the Russian state ensures that its citizens remain loyal and compliant, even in the face of economic hardship and international condemnation. Section 6. Election Interference. A Modern Wedge. Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election marked a new low in relations between the two countries. The Kremlin's efforts to sow discord and influence the outcome of the election through social media manipulation, hacking, and disinformation campaigns further deepened the distrust between the two nations. This interference, confirmed by U.S. intelligence agencies, was seen as a direct attack on American democracy. It fueled existing suspicions about Russia's intentions and made it significantly harder for any meaningful dialogue or cooperation to take place. Section 7. Ukraine, a breaking point. The 2014 annexation of Crimea and the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine have been major breaking points in U.S.-Russia relations. Russia's actions, widely condemned by the international community, were seen as a violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and a blatant disregard for international law. The U.S. responded to Russia's aggression with sanctions and increased military support for Ukraine. This further inflamed tensions, with Russia accusing the U.S. of meddling in its backyard and fueling the conflict. The Ukraine crisis has pushed U.S.-Russia relations to their lowest point since the Cold War. Section 8. A future marred by misunderstanding. The future of U.S.-Russia relations remains uncertain at best. The two nations, once allies during World War II, have since been locked in a complex and often adversarial relationship. This relationship has been characterized by periods of intense rivalry, such as the Cold War, and brief moments of cooperation like the post-Soviet era. However, the underlying tensions have never truly dissipated. Decades of mistrust, fueled by historical grievances, ideological clashes, and deliberate actions by both sides, have created a deep chasm that will be difficult to bridge. The Cold War era left a legacy of suspicion and competition, with both nations often viewing each other's actions through a lens of hostility. This has been exacerbated by events such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and more recently, Russia's annexation of Crimea. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine, coupled with Russia's increasingly authoritarian turn and its aggressive foreign policy, have made any prospect of a reset in relations highly unlikely in the near future. The situation in Ukraine has not only strained relations but also highlighted the stark differences in how each nation views its role in the world. Russia's actions are seen by the US and its allies as a blatant violation of international law, while Russia perceives its actions as a defense of its sphere of influence. As long as both sides continue to view each other through the lens of suspicion and hostility, the possibility of miscalculation and escalation remains high. This mutual distrust is not just limited to political and military spheres, but extends to economic and cultural interactions as well. Sanctions, cyber attacks, and propaganda have all played a role in deepening the divide. The lack of open communication channels further complicates efforts to de-escalate tensions. This dangerous dynamic threatens not only the security of both nations but also global stability. The ripple effects of US-Russia tensions are felt worldwide, influencing global markets, international alliances, and even the policies of other nations. The stakes are high, and the need for a nuanced and strategic approach to diplomacy has never been more critical. Without a concerted effort to understand and address the root causes of this mistrust, the future will remain marred by misunderstanding and conflict. Section 9. A Glimmer of Hope. Despite the deep divisions and seemingly insurmountable obstacles, there are glimmers of hope. Both countries share common interests in areas such as arms control, counter-terrorism, and climate change. Addressing these global challenges requires cooperation and dialogue, however difficult it may seem. Building trust will require patience, empathy, and a willingness to understand the other side's perspective. It will require moving beyond historical grievances and focusing on shared interests and common goals. The path forward is fraught with challenges, but the stakes are too high to give up on the possibility of a more constructive and peaceful relationship.